When I was 12 years old, I was lying in bed one night and I had recently been diagnosed with Crohn's disease and I was in so much pain. And I quite frankly could not remember the last time that I had slept well. And I remember asking why. And I was alone in my room. There was no one with me, but the answer came so loud and so clearly. And the voice told me that one day I would share my story with others to be able to help them on their journey. And that is why I'm here.
That is definitely why you're here.
Yeah.
And on that note, everybody, welcome to the Mike and Chris Show.
Welcome.
We're going to get right into it, and we're going to be talking all about Crohn's disease, why it's important to us, Kristen's extensive experience with it, and this is what we're here to do. This is what has shaped you and us, because I've been here with you since 2002, since she was 18.
I'd only had Crohn's for 6 years back then.
Yeah, and it's been a journey, and I've been a part of it, and I'm very glad I have been.
Well, thank you. So that voice also told me that I would be writing a book one day, but that'll be a story for another show, I guess.
Well, I'm pretty sure that's going to happen too, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But that was the time when I knew without a doubt that my journey, everything that I was going through would serve a deeper purpose. And of course, I had no idea where it would take me. You know, I thought my life would be one way, probably as maybe we all do as kids, but it ended up being quite different. So we're going to chat all about it.
Let's get into it.
So first up, let's chat about what is Crohn's, because even, you know, back in 1997 when I was diagnosed, not that many people knew what Crohn's was. Most doctors didn't even know what it was. So it was hard to be diagnosed with it. But Crohn's disease is an autoimmune disease. An autoimmune disease essentially means that your body is attacking itself. Your immune system is overreacting for whatever reason and attacking itself. And with Crohn's disease, that simply means that your immune system is attacking your gut. It's almost, imagine if it were thinking that your intestines were like a foreign object or had been transplanted or something like that. It's attacking it, so it causes inflammation, it causes ulcers, which causes a whole host of symptoms, which we'll chat about.
Should we clarify the difference between Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis?
Totally.
Since they're
they're
similar.
cousins. They're basically cousins.
So ulcerative colitis is inflammation of the colon. And
only in the colon.
It is similar to Crohn's disease, as in it affects the colon, but Crohn's disease can affect anywhere in your GI tract from mouth to anus.
Yes.
Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So they're two similar things. So we could probably say that this information would be applicable towards ulcerative colitis as well.
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because some people may not know that. That's a great thing to know.
So one of the questions that I get all the time is, you know, how was I diagnosed? What were the symptoms? So let's talk about that too. So when I was 12, I was at the end of my 7th grade year, and I went from being a really normal, very happy, very healthy kid to suddenly very, very sick. And I lost 30 pounds in a month. And I was someone who, I was already thin as a kid. And so I went to literally skin and bones. I went from 90 to 60 pounds.
That's a big deal.
Huge. I mean, it was a third of my body weight. Like I had no fat or muscle or anything in a month. Yeah, in 30 days.
You lost a pound a day at 90 pounds. That's crazy.
I mean, it just like flew off me, but it happened so quickly. And it's like back then I didn't know anyone who was sick. I didn't know anyone who had been diagnosed with anything. And so it's kind of the last thing that you're thinking is like, oh, maybe I have a disease or an illness. I had no idea what was going on. But my symptoms were very classic Crohn's symptoms. And Crohn's symptoms can really vary all over the place. But mine were, it started out, I remember the very, very first symptom I ever had. And it was before I ever had any like actual gut pain. It was, I had bloody stool, like very loose diarrhea that was bloody. And I remember being like, what? That's confusing. Like had no idea what was happening. Shortly after that, that's when the gut pain started. And Gosh, I would know Crohn's pain out of anywhere. Like, it is so different from any kind of other stomach ache or cramps or anything that I've ever had. It's so unique. But I remember back when I was, right before I was diagnosed, I was in softball. And I remember being like the outfield or something. And all of the sudden just getting so nauseous. And when you're nauseous and you start to salivate a lot, that's like the worst.
Definitely.
And so feeling so sick all of a sudden, and all of a sudden this pain just took over my gut and just being like, what is going on? And so I had to pull myself out of the game. But again, not thinking it was anything like crazy or serious. And my parents, I'm sure, weren't going to that place either. But so it was a lot of, running to the bathroom after that. For whatever reason, my Crohn's disease was very, very active at night. During the day, I would have, some gut pain, definitely have to run to the restroom. But at night, I was up all night long. And it happened so quickly. I mean, this was probably like a week of this happening, in a few days, whatever it was, before my mom ended up taking me to my pediatrician. And gosh, I was so fortunate because, again, like I said, Crohn's was so rare back then. It was not something that was common. And I remember going into the pediatrician's office, and you know how when you go to a doctor, like usually a nurse or like a nurse aide or something comes in first and takes your vitals and all that. So she came in, and this always stuck with me because my mom's right next to me, and she asked me if I was throwing up after I ate. And that wasn't the case at all. But I remember thinking, if I were doing that, I wouldn't tell you in front of my mom. Like, it was just the way that she asked it. It was so blunt, and there wasn't any caring to it. But anyway, I digress. So then my doctor comes in, my pediatrician, who I'd had my whole life, and I'm explaining my symptoms. So I'm nauseous all the time. I'm having to run to the bathroom. I have diarrhea, loss of appetite. Trying to think of what else I had. Basically, when I did eat, everything went right through me, and it would just cause like extreme gut pain at that point. And obviously I was losing a ton of weight because I was not absorbing nutrients. Anything that I was eating was not being absorbed. And also that I wasn't eating as much because I just felt so sick all the time. It's kind of like, I would say like a flu that starts out as the worst flu you can imagine, and then it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. It doesn't get any better. It just continues to spiral and get worse. And little did I know that my pediatrician, I was so fortunate in this, he went to medical school, and his roommate, obviously, and his roommate had Crohn's disease. And so as I'm telling him my symptoms, he immediately knows what I have. He immediately knows what's wrong. He knows what to test for. And this is so rare because throughout my life, I've met so many people who, especially back then, they would tell doctors their symptoms, and for years they were told that it was in their head and that they were crazy. And I can't even fathom. I've dealt with that in different ways throughout different journeys in my life. But when you're in so much pain and someone doesn't believe you, especially as a kid, that would be really hard. So I was very fortunate, but he immediately sent me for lab work. And I remember this still actually is a tip that I use to this day if I ever have to get lab work, which is thankfully very rare. But I had, back then in 1997, colored mascara was really popular. So I had blue mascara on. So my eyelashes were bright blue.
Okay.
And I remember the lovely lady who was drawing my blood. She could tell how scared I was, terrified of needles. I was so scared to get my blood drawn. I couldn't even remember having it drawn as a kid. And I remember her telling me, I'm going to count to 3. And when I count to 3, I'm going to put the needle in. You're going to breathe out. And she said, because your body cannot tense up when you're breathing out. And I did that, and it was so helpful, especially as a kid. But I carried that on my entire life. Like anytime I got an IV or anything, I would breathe out when they were doing it. So helpful tip for you.
Can I ask this?
Please.
I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, so what were they testing for? How do they know if someone has Crohn's disease?
I don't remember everything that they tested, and it might have changed this day.
This is obviously, this is
long time
a while ago. But from the best that you can remember, what were they looking for?
The best I can remember is what was off the charts for me was my sedimentation rate. I believe it's called your ESR. It's a very long word. But if you look up sed rate, that's what you're going to find. And it is one of the markers that tests inflammation. and it's supposed to be like a very low number. Mine was like through the roof. And so he immediately knew. That's why he knew to test that, because he was looking for inflammation in my body. And that's when that came back really high. That's when they kind of knew, okay, we're definitely headed in the right direction. I still think that she has Crohn's. Let's get her to a GI specialist. So that was kind of my next step.
Okay.
So then I was, scheduled with a GI specialist, and the stars were lined up for me. I was someone looking out for me, definitely, because I had the best pediatric GI doctor. He was absolutely incredible. And he basically did a colonoscopy, and I was just kind of very quickly thrown into this world of like medicines and doctors and procedures and
needles
and all of that stuff. But I guess I should back up a little bit for that. So when my doctor saw that my SED rate was super high, he immediately put me on anti-inflammatories. And that was when I went from taking no medications ever to 96 pills a week. It was a lot of meds all of the time in hopes to get the inflammation really down.
96 pills a week.
96.
Zero pills to 96 pills a week as a child.
I remember counting it. Yeah.
Jeez.
That's 12 years old. Yeah. So I was very much thrust into this world that made no sense to me whatsoever. And I just kind of had to quickly grow up and quickly learn as I went. But the colonoscopy that they did, so if you've never had a colonoscopy before, colonoscopy itself is like easy breezy, honestly, because they either put you out, or back then they put me under, like conscious sedation. Is that what it's called?
Correct.
Yeah. So you're out.
It's
basically.
It's not general anesthesia.
There you go. Exactly. They give you a lot of painkillers and stuff just to like put you out. So the hardest part about a colonoscopy is the prep, especially as a kid, because I wasn't allowed to eat anything for 24 hours before. And then you have to take a shit ton of laxatives. Literally a shit ton.
No pun intended.
But kind of, sort of. And so you basically, the purpose is to completely clear your system out so they can have a clear view into your intestines. So they did that, took a bunch of pictures. I'm sure my mom still has the pictures to this day, because she had them my entire childhood and everything. And that's how they diagnosed Crohn's disease, and they took biopsies as well. But I just had my entire intestines was inflamed and bleeding and ulcering. And it was, not a pretty scene in there. And then for upper GI, they do, it's like a barium x-ray. I don't remember the exact name of it, but you drink a bunch of like chalky, disgusting liquid that they'll flavor for you. Do you remember that?
I remember seeing you have to do this a few times.
Yeah.
It doesn't look very pleasurable.
Yeah. You have to drink and like do a lot of things that you don't want to do before any kind of like gut test. Not fun. Or my very sweet dad would drink some of the prep for me sometimes, because you're forced to finish it. And he was like, "You don't need all of this. I'll take some of it for you."
That's love, by the way.
It was
just for the record.
Love, yeah.
You look up the definition of love. It's your dad drinking that.
There's a picture of him drinking whatever it was I had to drink before CT scans. So for the upper GI, they did basically the barium. So they're watching this chalky liquid that shows up. It's radioactive for all I know. That shows up on an x-ray and will show different parts of inflammation and things like that going on. So that kind of mapped out my intestines for them, and they saw what they were dealing with. It was really severe, and it took, probably about a year and a half to find like any medications that worked. I just kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker, even though the medications that I was on, they just weren't working very well. And back then in 1997, they didn't have a whole lot that they could do. It was like the few select medications. They didn't have biologics at the time, which are the newer medications.
What is a biologic?
A biologic is what I ended up taking later on in my life, and they're the more advanced medications. They come with usually scarier side effects, so there's a risk versus benefit, but they alter the way that your immune system works, and they worked very well for me. It wasn't until I found my first biologic medication when I was 14 that like instant remission. Up until that point, so like 12 and a half-ish is when I was diagnosed. Up until I was just over 14, it was probably like a month after my 14th birthday. I was really like in and out sick. The only thing that was working for me, which you can't take for very long, are anti-inflammatory steroids. Something like prednisone is what I was on. It worked wonders for me, but they also come with extremely harsh side effects, and the longer you're on them, the more long-term side effects you can deal with. I mean, at 13 years old, I was having some kind of bone x-ray testing done to check for pre-osteoporosis.
Because that's a side effect of...
Because it steals prednisone. It steals the calcium from your bones. Exactly. The list, there's something like 90-something side effects of prednisone. And I had all of them.
And as if you weren't having a difficult time enough as a kid, tell everyone what, let's say, one of the worst side effects of prednisone is.
Oh, man.
I believe it's called moon face.
Yeah. Prednisone starts out as like a miracle drug. Like I can only speak for myself, obviously, but I would take it, and within 24 hours, I would have so much crazy energy. I would have an appetite that was like insatiable, basically. I would want to eat anything and everything. But the hardest side effect for sure, especially as a kid, was it gives you moon face. So it basically makes your face round. And as a kid, my gosh, middle school is hard enough. Like going back with really, really puffy cheeks and looking completely different.
Almost as if, for someone that's never seen it, think like if you've ever someone that has had their wisdom teeth taken out, maybe like the next day.
You know what's funny? My cheeks never got very puffy for my wisdom
Mine
teeth.
did.
But yeah.
Mine did. I'm just trying to think of something that's a little
That's
bit
actually,
more
that's
common.
very smart. Yeah.
But your cheeks get very, very swollen. Mm-hmm. Very swollen.
Very swollen. Yeah. Yeah, that was a tough one. So for the first year and a half, it was just kind of like I had stayed on my first hospital stay about a month after I was diagnosed. I remember the day that I was diagnosed only because it was May 23rd, 1997, only because the date on my prednisone prescription bottle. I remember exactly where I was sitting in the hospital pharmacy with both my parents next to me looking at it. It said May 23rd. It was kind of trip.
Interesting.
Yeah. So one of the most common questions that came up with my doctors that I saw was, did I have any family history of Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, anything like that? And I didn't. And they always kind of like, really? Like paused, because it's usually a genetic disorder. Like it usually, not meaning like genetics cause it, but it's usually like someone's mother or brother, or there's more people in the family that usually have it. And I think that's also why it hit us so off guard, because it's not like something we were ever expecting that I would suddenly end up with an autoimmune disease. So yeah.
Not very common. I mean,
Exactly.
when we started dating, I had never heard of Crohn's disease.
That's right. Yeah, I did
all.
kind of explain what it was. It took me a long time to explain it in a short way like I did.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like nowadays there's commercials for Crohn's medications and everything. I feel like it's so much more prevalent now.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Absolutely.
gut issues in general, whether it's ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So kind of my journey with medications. So I started with kind of the basic medications. Gosh, again, like when I was diagnosed, there really wasn't much to do. The one thing that they did, if medications weren't working, which was so hard, was you would be taken completely off of food.
That would be so tough.
Oh my God.
Especially as a kid.
You do not realize how much our society revolves around food until you're taken off of food.
I do.
It is every other freaking commercial. It is you are planning breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like it is everything. When you take food away, it's like, what do I do with my life?
I mean, we need food to live, and food is delicious, and we plan our days around food.
Exactly.
Of course, it's very, very important.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it was about...
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So if you weren't able to eat, like let's say in the hospital, what did they do? I mean, how long did they take food away? And was it helpful? Was it helpful for your disease? Do you feel like your body was, I don't know, easing up, healing a little bit more when they did take you off food?
That's fascinating. I never thought about that till you mentioned that. don't actually think it was that helpful for me. I still had so much pain and surprisingly still was running to the bathroom even when I hadn't eaten in a couple weeks. So
there's also, if you think about it, like that added stress, especially from a child's perspective,
oh my gosh,
the added stress of not being able to eat. This would be a good time to interject. Kristen has showed me some of her notebooks back when she was a kid in the hospital, and she used to literally draw her meals.
And do you remember the lists of food I made?
Yes.
Lists and lists and
Yes.
lists of food that I
Yes.
wanted to eat. It's really traumatic. That's the one thing that I do really wish the conventional medicine did, is they prepared you mentally for those things. They don't prepare you at all. They just kind of throw you into this.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
You say it's traumatic. So let's say there's a parent listening to this video and they may be wondering, like, okay, that would be very tough if I had to pull my kid off of food. Is there anything that you suggest that helped you cope with that while you're in the hospital?
I would say talking through it for sure. My mom was always really good at talking through things with me. And I think that's really the one thing you can do, is just like let your child or whoever it is just talk it out.
Did it help you to write and draw?
Mm-hmm. It did, for sure.
Okay.
I've talked to many people about this who've been off food for extended periods of time, and they all said the same thing. You oddly become obsessed with cooking shows. Like I used to watch Food Network
Okay.
all day.
All right.
But kind of back to your question of, so it's not like you're just taking off food and that's it. Like they don't give you anything, because what can we live like maybe a week without food, something like that. But obviously they're not going to do that to you.
Right. So what do they do?
Yeah. So they want to go like a maximum of usually a few days. But what they do is, so I was admitted to the hospital. It was about, probably only a few weeks after I was like officially diagnosed. And I was instantly told, you can no longer eat. And I was like, what? This doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I have to eat. And then they came in and explained to me that they were going to put a PICC line in, and what I thought they were going to do. So a PICC line is, you might be able to explain this better than I can, but it's basically a thin tube that is inserted into an IV into your central vein. Is that correct? It's fed up into your arm.
So with an IV, you have a catheter that goes into your vein so they can give medications. With a PICC line, they're feeding the catheter up the vein, up closer,
and it's
towards your heart.
One. Yeah.
It's way more invasive, and it just doesn't happen nearly as much as an IV. But it's also, don't they do that when they need a line placed for several days at a time? Was that one of their main reasons for doing it for you?
So one of the main reasons is TPN. So I'll get into what TPN is. It's basically what they feed you during the time through IV. TPN is a lot thicker, so it was I had it once before in like a hand IV, and it's very painful because it's so thick. And they only let me do that for like 2 days. And they're like, okay, you need to get a PICC line. But it's that, and you can have a PICC line. Back then, I believe it was up to a month. Now, I believe it's like up to 6 months you can have it. They just have to change the dressing and things like that. But it is a real lifesaver if, an IV, like a regular IV, I believe the max you can have that is like 3 to 5 days, something around there.
It's probably different per hospital.
Totally.
Or whatever, yeah.
Somewhere around that gauge.
Yeah.
But even if it were thin enough, you don't want to have constant IVs placed. That puts a lot of strain on your veins in your body.
Especially as a kid. We're just talking about all of these things that were extremely traumatic for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I can only assume you went from being super scared of needles to at some point just being like, this is my life.
I always had a little bit of a fear of them, but yeah, it's just, you just kind of get used to it. I would say it's not like, oh, IV time. Awesome. You know, it's more of like okay, is what it is. Like some of the medications that I eventually was placed on, I had to go in to the hospital every 4 to 8 weeks and have an IV placed. So you get used to it. It just becomes a part of your life.
Yeah.
So when they were explaining the PICC line to me, remember that I'm 12 years old. I had never been in a hospital before. The hospital that I would normally be placed in was on strike at the time. The nurses were on strike. And so they put me in a different hospital that I had like literally never stepped foot in. I had no idea who the doctors were. I was not familiar with anyone because none of my medical staff that was taking care of me was there. And so they were trying to explain a PICC line to me, and I literally thought they were going to sew it to my arm. I was terrified.
You're a kid. You're a kid. You don't know.
Oh, I had no idea. Yeah, I had no idea.
It's a scary
what they were
place
doing.
when you're a kid. I wouldn't want to be there as a child.
Totally. And so basically what they did is they placed the PICC line. I don't have a ton of memories of it. I remember screaming a lot. And I know it very much scarred my parents, but I know my mom said it took like from afternoon to evening to place it, because when you are, I've never understood why they don't give you like some sort of sedative or something when they do this, because
maybe they do now.
Maybe, who knows?
Yeah, that was so long ago.
Yeah. So I was totally fully aware, wide awake. And when you get super, super tense, your veins can collapse. And so that's what kept happening to me. And so they had to keep doing it over and over and over until they could finally get it. And they were able to get it like right up to my shoulder, which is like the bare minimum you can get it in. You wanted it a little bit further. So what they do is they end up injecting that with some sort of dye that shows up on an x-ray so they can see it, like where it's placed. And no one was super happy with it, but they'd known like what I'd been through at that point. So they let me
Let
be.
it be.
Exactly.
Let her be.
Just let me be.
Yeah.
And so I was, I'm trying to remember. I think I was in the hospital for maybe about a week. That's the kind of minimum back then that they would start TPN. So TPN is like a liquid nutrition loosely based.
I think if I screw this up, I'll put an asterisk at the bottom of the video, but I think TPN stands for total parental nutrition.
Exactly.
Which just essentially means you're getting all of your nutrition from that line.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. And so it basically just keeps you alive. And the idea is they're taking you off food to give your time for your gut to rest. And I was taken off food for 15 days. It was probably the longest 15 days of my life. And so I was at home for, 7-8 days, whatever it was, with my TPN. And so I had this super sweet backpack that I would have. I learned to hook it up myself. I became very, very particular about who could like touch it and things, because we constantly had home nurses come over and they had to like change my dressing and things like that. And I always wanted to do my own, what do they flush lines with? Is like heparin or something?
Saline?
No, it's like something.
Oh, for blood clots?
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah, they did that
right.
often. And I would always do my own, and that became like my first like real introduction to, okay, this is my life now. But when you're 12 years old too, you're never thinking, at least I wasn't, that this is going to be a lifetime thing. Like I have a chronic disease. It's going to be forever. And back then too, I was thinking that they would have a cure in a short time. And so that started really my journey of, okay, they took me off food because that was their last ditch effort. That's kind of like a last resort, is when they take you off food because medications aren't working. And so took me off food, and then they start you back. You can't just be off food for a couple weeks and then just dive back into like nachos and hamburgers and things like that. You want to eat like really soft foods. It was like a very white, bland diet. So like white rice, bread, potatoes, things like that. No dairy. But I remember my mom made me, my very first thing, she made me some white rice with chicken broth. And it's still something I can't even eat to this day because I immediately threw it all up. Like I was so sick. And so that's why when you were saying, do you think it helped and stuff, I was maybe a little bit, but not for what it was worth back then. But I guess they had no other option at the time.
It's interesting that they'll take you off food, but you and I both know, with your experience and some of the doctors we've been through that have said that food plays no role in the management of your disease.
Right, it makes no difference.
I find that somewhat interesting.
Oh, it's
fascinating. I find that very interesting,
it's
actually.
Fascinating.
Right?
Yeah.
It obviously makes a difference because it's protocol and they do it when need be in the hospital. So for me to say that food plays no role in the management of Crohn's disease is silly. It's like saying the fuel you put in your car makes absolutely no difference as to how it performs. Just pour Coca-Cola in your car, you're good to go. You're good to go.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, huh?
It's completely changed our lives, and we're going to get into that, but just something to ponder on if you've never considered this.
Oh, totally. It interests me now because just like you said, that connection, and also how I would be told things to avoid, but that diet made no difference, like in almost the same breath.
Right.
Very interesting.
I also would like to say, because I've been there and I lived with Kristen in the hospitals many times when we were in there. And there were also many times where they took you off food, but just because they take you off food doesn't mean you have to go on TPN.
No,
I just want to say that because
it was like at least, I think I've been off food like after surgery without TPN. I think it was for like 5 days.
Okay.
I kind of think that's the max that they'll do before they do TPN.
Okay. I just don't want to freak people out if they're
Totally.
listening and they're thinking, oh my gosh, is
I'm
that
a
going to happen to me?
24-hour
No, that's not the case.
Totally. I mean, we all know our bodies can live without food for quite a while. But yeah, eventually they have to replace it.
Right.
Exactly. So that's kind of where I started, and then went through 8th grade. It was just up and down constantly because they called me very quickly what's called steroid dependent, and I became very dependent on prednisone. Whenever they would try to wean me off, I would get so sick again, like instantly sick. Put me back on, wean me off, so sick. It was just this cycle that just kept happening. I remember twice being on vacation with my younger brother and my parents and being so sick. Once was at Disneyland and once when we were in Reno, and just feeling completely awful. But when I was 14, it was, oh gosh, when was it? It was right before freshman year, I believe, when I started it. I started a new medication that was brand new, basically. It had just been approved for Crohn's disease. And that was a medication that I had to go in every 8 weeks, get an IV in. It took 2 hours to put in. That medication worked almost instantly, and I was in remission from that point on for 4 years, 4.5 actually.
Wow.
And then when I went out of remission, that's when you remember, because I was in remission for all of high school. Again, I was so blessed because we all know high school, it's tough years, you know?
Were people nice to you?
In what way do you mean?
Middle school, high school. Did you ever have to go on prednisone in high school?
I didn't. I was in
Just middle
remission
school.
literally from like first few months of 9th grade all the way through, like complete remission.
Let me ask this, because I'm thinking about parents here that may have a child with Crohn's and may be having a difficult time. Were there times where kids weren't very nice to you because maybe, let's say, you were puffy with the prednisone?
8th grade, oh my gosh. Thank you for that reminder. I was so fortunate because I was hardly teased as a kid. So I can't even say this was a terrible thing because these are one of the very few times that I remember. But I remember it was in 8th grade where I was dropping off my backpack. I think before like lunch, we could drop off our backpacks in our next class and then like go get lunch. And it was me and this little boy that was in there. And I think he was a grade younger than me. And I was dropping off my backpack and I had my little big puffy cheeks and I was still super, super skinny. And he turned around and said, "What the hell is wrong with your face?" And I just froze. I was like, and then he left. And I didn't even know what to do. And I remember telling my dad, oh, my lovely dad, he probably, he wanted to know who the kid was just so he could give him a look. He said, I'm not going to do anything.
That's all it takes.
Yeah.
All it takes is a look. It's the dad look.
He said,
we all
I'm
know
not
about
gonna
that
do
dad
anything.
look.
Just
Yeah.
point who it is and I will give him a look and he'll never do that again.
Okay. And,
That's the dad thing.
Were there anyone else that gave you a hard time?
That was it.
Okay.
It's interesting because I've had people that I went to middle school with reach out just through like my Instagram because they find me, and start following me or whatever. And a few people have reached out and they were like, oh my gosh, I had no idea you were sick back then. Because when you think about it, when you think back then, you're so self-absorbed. You're only worried about yourself and how you look and how people are treating you. You're not even really thinking about other people and what they're possibly going through.
Right.
You
I
know?
guess I wanted to ask the question because I think about what if there's some kids out there that are having a hard time and being
I'm sure there
singled
are.
out, and if you had any experience or advice, maybe there's a parent out there concerned,
Absolutely. I would say For me, that would go back to like finding your child a really good therapist or being very willing to just like openly talk with them about it. Because maybe there's some therapists out there that specialize in bullying and how to deal with that and how to approach that. Because, oh my gosh, I'm sure that happens all of the time. I do remember that once that kid found out that I had a disease, I remember him coming up to me. It was like months later, him coming up to me and being like, "Do you have a disease?" And I said, "Yes." And then he walked away. And I think he felt a little bit bad, just a teensy bit.
Obviously, that's not right and that's not cool, but
yeah,
it's a kid.
Exactly.
And kids do dumb shit.
Exactly.
And so did I.
Oh,
I was never mean to people like that, but just like,
exactly.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's a kid.
Exactly. So I was fortunate. I was in remission. I did everything that I could to pretend to be normal. Nobody knew that I was sick because I didn't want to be the odd one out. I mean, nobody does in high school, but I was fortunate because I was on the medication at the time that didn't have many side effects for me at the time. Yes, it lowered my immune system. It's not like medications like healed me. They cover up symptoms. That's exactly what they do. So they made my life easier at the time.
Which I'm sure was a great thing because
Absolutely.
you were probably dealing with as much as you could handle at that time.
Yes.
Right?
There are so many people who beat themselves up for, trying diet changes and things like that and still having to take medications. And what I want everyone to know is that medications serve a purpose. They have a time and a place.
Absolutely.
Like there is no reason to make your life even harder than it already is for having to take a medication. You're beating yourself up. You're just adding stress to your life. You're making yourself sicker.
Definitely. Yep.
So we want to keep going on talking about kind of medications?
Sure.
All right, let's do it.
Why not?
So I was on one medication. I'm very particular. I don't talk about the names of medications. I'm sure that will come up as a question because I never want anyone to connect their experience with mine because we all react differently to medications.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Exactly.
So you cannot base your potential experience with Kristen's.
Absolutely.
Right.
I know people that took the same medication I was on in high school that had serious reactions to it. I didn't. I was totally fine with it. So you just never know. And then I've also had very, very serious reactions to medications for Crohn's that other people have probably had no reaction to. And it's worked wonders for them. So when I was 18 and a half, that's when, still in remission from that same medication, and that's when I met this lovely guy.
Oh, yeah. Drop me into the
He
picture.
came into this life.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
And it was pretty quickly after that, I mean, within 6 months of us dating, that the medication I was on stopped working because that's the thing. I had been on so many medications at this point, but they work for a certain amount of time. And then either your body builds up antibodies to them, which is what happened for me, or they just stop working the way that they used to. And my life, as I thought that it was always be, is start one medication, it would stop working, move on to the next. That would stop working, move on to the next. Like no big deal. That's how I literally thought my entire life would be. And so when we were dating, so about 6 months in, I started to get sick again. My Crohn's started to flare. And so they ended up trying to double the medication that I was on at the time, tried to add in another medication. The other medication that they added on was a chemo-like drug that caused a ton of hair loss, and I was very sick from it. So that was very quickly not worth it to me. And so, gosh, it took several months, but eventually I was able to start a different medication, and this medication was brand new. There were no long-term studies on it. It was not yet approved for Crohn's disease. My doctor actually had to really push for me to get approved for it because it was a medication that cost $10,000 a month. And thankfully my insurance covered it. And I remember you giving me my very first shot of it.
I remember
and
that
it
time.
felt like fire in my body.
I remember that time. Yeah.
Do you remember that? I was so used to shots at that point. He'd given me so many different kinds of shots. And this one, for whatever reason, it felt like fire spreading through like my muscles. And I remember just like, and
I always remember being so surprised that it hurt that much.
Same here.
Because I had given Kristen injections of other meds at the time, and she never had any of that issue. So I almost felt like, what's going on here? Like, is this how it's supposed to happen?
Did I tell you it wasn't that long ago even, and that medication's been out since 2003. So it took him 17-ish years to figure out that it was a preservative in it that was causing that. And it wasn't with everyone. Some people were reacting to it. They didn't know why at the time. They didn't know why it felt like that. But I like dreaded those shots. I had to do them every single week, one in each arm.
And it was cold. We had to keep it in the fridge.
It was freezing, yeah.
So it burned and was cold.
Yeah. If you travel or anything, you had to bring like a little ice pack, a little doctor's note with you.
Yeah.
So I was on that medication for 6.5 years. And about 1.5 years after starting that med, I had just started fashion design school. I was like so excited about my future. It's what I had always dreamt of doing. And I remember one day I woke up and I had a really bad sinus infection and my voice had went away. I had no voice and didn't really think much of it because by that point, my immune system was definitely lower. Like I would catch things and like even say I caught a cold from you or something, it would last a lot longer for me than it would for Mike usually. And so I didn't really think much of it, was going to school, but this sinus infection kept getting worse and my voice was not coming back. And so I used to wait as long as I could to go to the doctors. Like I would even be full on flaring with Crohn's and would wait a good month to even call my doctor because I knew it's not like my doctor would be like, oh, come on, let's have a party. This be awesome.
Is it because you felt like you weren't really given solutions?
No, I was given solutions, but the solutions are hard. They're really hard because it's usually prednisone, lots of side effects. It's usually, let's do a colonoscopy. Let's try these new medications that we don't know how your body's going to respond to. It was like hard and not fun. So I would rather deal with the Crohn's myself for a while, which I did so many times. As an adult, as a kid, I didn't even have that option because my parents weren't in charge of me. You know, as an adult, I'm in charge of myself. And so I have the sinus infection. I have no voice, going to fashion design school. That was the only cool part. So I go to the doctor. They do what they would normally do, give you an antibiotic for sinus infection. Sinus infection went away. My voice came back. I thought everything was fine. A few days after I stopped the antibiotic, sinus infection came back. My voice went away again. And then this quickly became my life, as I'm sure you remember. You were you in the fire department? You were...
What year are we talking?
This would have been 2006, I believe.
Yes.
That's what I
got
thought.
hired in 2005.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so you were working as a firefighter back then. So that really just became my life of constant rounds of antibiotics. And amazingly, my gut like stood up to them. Now knowing what I know about antibiotics and what they do to your gut, I was on them for pretty much like 6 years straight. So that back then, because this medication was so new, they could not link these sinus infections, my voice going away, to the medication, which they did many years later. So that's just kind of my life, doing that, graduate fashion design school, have no voice.
And just to clarify, when you say you were on antibiotics for 6 years straight, like you kind of almost were. Like typically for a normal-ish person, you're on a round of antibiotics and you would have
and that's a lot.
Hopefully go off of them or take time off. But she was in such a bad place with her health that she was literally on antibiotics almost all of the time, which is almost unheard of.
It started out as, 7-day doses and then 14-day doses and then 30-day doses. And then I'd take like a week or two off and then right back on.
Right.
So
it was like
that's
a cycle. It was
totally,
like a cycle.
Exactly. That's the only time really life felt really livable. It was the most severe congestion and mucus and everything that I had could ever imagine experiencing. And that just became my life. And was because my doctors, couldn't connect it to the medication back then, but they didn't know what else to do. I was passed from doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor. And they, for the most part, didn't really like when they couldn't figure it out and they didn't have any option.
I mean, I wouldn't either. It'd be frustrating.
Absolutely.
I mean, doctors are there to help. They want to help people. So that would bother me.
Absolutely.
You know?
And it was one of the first times where people started to not believe me. I remember a doctor thinking that I was making it up and pretending that my voice was gone. And it wasn't until they like scoped my sinuses. They basically put like a camera. It's almost like an endoscopy when they put a camera down, only that goes into your stomach. They numb you up and then they put a camera down into your like sinuses or not your sinuses, I guess your back of your nose. I don't know what that area is called.
Okay, let's just call it your airway.
There you go, your airway.
Yeah.
And they saw that it was just like covered in pus and ulcers, and it was not a happy place in there. And so that's when they really started to believe me that this was actually something serious. But again, there wasn't really anything that they could offer me besides antibiotic. That was my only option back then.
This is a little off topic, but I want to say it because it's something that bothered me. There were several times throughout the course when we were together that I saw a medical professional not take you seriously and think that you were playing it up because of how you looked.
Yeah.
They were just going off of how you looked. And the truth is you didn't really look sick, right? And you were good at hiding it.
I really never looked.
But I just want this to be a public service announcement that please don't judge someone by their looks, because you never know how they're really feeling, especially with something like Crohn's disease. You don't look at someone and say to yourself like, oh, they're in a flare-up right now. It's like, it's not like seeing like something on someone's skin and realizing like, oh, did you get hurt? It's like you can't tell with Crohn's.
Totally.
Yeah.
And
Please give people the opportunity.
Yes. I learned from a very young age to hide it. Honestly, I didn't want people to know I was sick, so I would learn to smile through the most excruciating pain. Even when my doctors would come into my own hospital room, I could have been in so much pain, and the second they walked in, I would turn it around and smile. And I remember my GI doctor, I'm sure you know this, just like you were saying, constantly saying if he hadn't done my tests, if he hadn't done the colonoscopies, he would have no clue that I was sick because I always looked well.
And I'd say this is why it's even more important to be open with your doctor.
Yes.
And tell them everything, because there's some things that they would just never know unless you tell them, and then they can test for certain things.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, too, if you have a doctor that doesn't believe you or thinks you're playing it up when you are not, find a new doctor.
Yeah. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
I think as humans, we tend to forget that just because a doctor says something, or really anyone, but just because they say something or they don't believe you or they say something's true, doesn't mean that it's true. Like, we're all just human when it comes down to it. People are just, teaching what they know, what their experience is.
Let's take this as an example. What if, so the doctor that initially diagnosed you with Crohn's, they knew because the roommate had it. What if you got another doctor?
Absolutely.
That didn't have that roommate?
My life could have been very, very different.
Yeah, because maybe your Crohn's wouldn't have been found until it was too late. I don't know, because you've had such a rough go with Crohn's.
Absolutely. Yeah, just speaking of doctors, so when I switched from pediatrics, so you switch from pediatrics to adult medicine usually when you're 18. So I was assigned like a random adult GI doctor, and he was awful. Oh my gosh, he was the worst. He didn't care about me at all. And that's what I just want the lesson to be is, if that's your case, again, they're just human. Find a new doctor, because that's exactly what I did.
Why do you feel like he didn't care?
He would never respond to, never return my calls. I remember calling and sobbing on the phone with the receptionist and just would never get back to me. He changed some of my medications, ended up putting me on cheaper medications instead of the ones that I was on. When you
did he listen to you?
No, there you go. That's the number one.
And that's what I want to talk about. Yeah. Is it's so important to have a practitioner that is willing to listen to you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a huge one.
Yeah.
It's just, I ended up finding my next GI doctor who was really just the most caring person. He really took control of all of my health, even though it wasn't his responsibility. He was the one finding me constant, different ear, nose, and throat doctors, ones that would actually help me. Would be very frustrated with my previous GI doctor because he had me. I remember it was particular. I was on a medication that I was only supposed to be on for 3 months. That's the max amount of time you could take it. And he had me, by the time I saw my new GI doctor, on that for 6 months. And I remember my GI doctor was pissed. But that's the kind of people you want in your corner. People who are going to fight for you. It's not even, my GI doctor wasn't on board with diet, and I don't see him anymore. I have really no reason to see him anymore. But when I had him, he was what I needed at the time because he fought for me. He fought for both of us.
He was a great doctor.
He was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I spent a lot of time around him too.
Yeah, you did. But kind of my progression of going back to the medication that I was on that causes sinus infections. So I dealt with that for many years. I was on this medication for 6.5 years total. And at the end, I was working as a fashion designer and on antibiotics all the time. I remember having these just very strange symptoms. And I had shingles before, which if you've never had shingles or heard of it, it's basically a reactivation of chickenpox as an adult. And it's like sores that follow the line of nerves, and it's nerve pain. And I remember when I had it, it felt like someone literally is like stabbing you in the back. It just it jolts you. And so I'd had that before, and it was kind of felt like that again. I was having this like weird nerve pain. And I went and saw my GI doctor. He insisted that I came in, even though, again, it wasn't even GI related, but he insisted that I came in. He made me go to the ER. He told me I had no other choice. I had to go to the ER. I'd already ignored my other doctor that week that had told me to go to the ER because I was just in the mindset of, no, I have to work. I need to get back to work. This isn't as important. I need to get my job done. This will be fine. He really thought that I had a blood clot in my lung, which is exactly what the same as the other doctor had thought. And so he had me go to the emergency room, which was, what did you say, half a block away?
Yeah, this is in San Francisco, and the medical offices were,
just down the street.
Yeah, a block.
Yeah.
Blockish away.
Yeah, a little uphill.
Yeah.
So first he wanted me to take an ambulance. Do you remember this story?
Yes.
He wanted me. Mike was at work. Mike couldn't be there, or else he would have been because he was always there. So he wanted me to take an ambulance a block to the hospital. I was like, that seems way overkill. I'm good. So he's like, okay, then I'm going to walk you down to the shuttle and you're going to take the shuttle there. This is who I was at the time. This breathes who I still am. The second he walked me downstairs to the street, to the shuttle, the second he turned his back, I started walking up the hill. But this is when everything in my life changed because by the time I got to the hospital building, I was wheezing. I could hardly breathe.
This is a big turning point for Kristen's life, by the way.
This was a huge turning point. And so I remember going into the bathroom, splashing some water on my face, and I looked in the mirror, and it was the first time in my entire life, no matter how sick I had been, it was the first time that I did not recognize myself. I looked in my eyes, and they were just empty. And so I walk up to the ER after I catch my breath, check myself in. I'm just kind of in the mindset, which I'd always been in, of it's going to be fine, nothing major, huge ever happens to me. It's always fixed. It'd be fine. My focus literally, because this hospital was in San Francisco, was looking at the clock, making sure I'd get out of there before I hit traffic. That was my thought. So they take me in for an x-ray and a blood test, and both show that I have possibly a blood clot in my lung, which can be very dangerous. So they're freaking out around me. They rush me into a CT scan. Turns out I don't have a blood clot in my lungs, but what it does turn out is that I have fungus in my lungs. I had 3 different spots. And I remember my GI doctor coming in, and he said that he was leaving for the night. And he said, the reason I know that this isn't cancer is because I just had pneumonia the month before, and I had an x-ray then. And he said, it's not possible that it would have grown this fast to what the size it is now. And so I was admitted to the hospital, so I did not make it home before traffic, sadly. And Mike got out of work the next morning, came to visit me. But this is when they were able to, because they had enough studies at that point with the medication that I was on, they were able to realize that this was directly correlated to the medication that I was on. And so they instantly took me off of it. And something in my life that I had never, oh my gosh, I never imagined this happening. Just like I said, I thought my life would be take one medication, it would stop working. Take another medication, that would stop working. Take a new medication. Like I just thought that's how my life would be. But when I was taken off of this medication, there were no more new medications. I was completely out of options.
How did you feel about that?
Uh,
Did it scare you?
It really scared me. It really, really scared me. And so my doctor put me on, my only real option was taking a medication that I'd been on when I was 14 years old. That when I was 14, I remember because my mom told me, I didn't remember it at the time, but my mom told me later that my GI doctor had called over the weekend because my white blood cell count had gone down to 0. And that means basically your immune system is so low that you're going to catch anything and everything. I believe it was my white blood cell count. And so I had to have blood tests every single week when I was on this medication to watch my white blood cells. And thankfully it was okay. But the thing is that the medication just didn't work for me anymore. It worked for me back then, but it didn't work for me. And so this is when I entered this time of, it was, May 2010 is when I had the fungus in my lungs, of just getting so sick and sicker and sicker and sicker and trying to push through at my job and thinking that that was my only option, and realizing it took me to the point of I made myself so sick because I refused to, quit my job or take time off or whatever it was, even though I was in and out of work all the time.
And this is May 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And then how many surgeries did you have to have Crohn's related prior to that time?
That was 3.
Okay.
That was my 3rd surgery.
And which were what?
I had 2 fistula surgeries, do you remember those?
I do.
Yeah, it was back when I was probably 19-ish, 18, 19, something like that. It was pretty early when we were dating.
Okay.
But a fistula is essentially, it's been so long since I've even know what these things are. I'm trying to remember.
It's kind of like a tube that grows.
Exactly. It's like a tube that grows to the outside of your body from an intestine. It was very, very painful for me. I had 2 surgeries on that. The first one failed, so I had a second one. And then my first major operation was less than a month, maybe 3 weeks after our wedding in 2007, when I had my first resection. That's when they took out 6 inches of my large intestine. And that's because it was obstructed, super inflamed. So I'd had 3 surgeries.
I'm sure some people, because we got questions on that, are wondering, so with the resection surgery, how bad was that for you?
That was real hard. But again, you can't compare your experience to mine because, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I guess maybe, and we're going to get into your bigger surgery that you had, but is it something to be scared about? Is it something to be nervous about? If someone's thinking to themselves, I might have to have a resection.
I mean, I feel like any surgery like that's going to be nerve-wracking because it is a huge deal. My doctor, he cut 6 inches, basically went right around my belly button. So it's a big deal. But the reason mine was so hard is because I had a lot of complications after surgery, which aren't always common. So yes, regardless, the surgery I would say is going to be hard because it is a huge surgery. It is what I would consider more of a last resort kind of thing. That's what it was for me. It became the medications weren't working for this.
And when we say resection, what they're essentially doing is taking out the affected part of the intestine, right?
And then put it back together.
It's almost like they're cutting it out, and
exactly. And
hence the word resection.
Exactly. I had a fabulous surgeon.
Yeah.
And I ended up with an infection after surgery. It was I think about 2 weeks after surgery, I ended up back in the hospital with an infection. It was a really, really, really tough surgery for me. But again, my experience is unique. My immune system was really low at the time. So all of those things are going to play into it. the stronger you can be going into surgery, physically and mentally, the better your recovery is probably going to be.
Absolutely.
Especially mentally.
Boosting that immune system. Absolutely.
Do some of that inner work, build up that mindset, build up that immune system as much as you can. I think those are going to give you a really solid place to start. So yeah, those were my first 3 surgeries.
And the idea behind a resection is taking away the diseased portion in hopes that it doesn't come back.
Exactly.
But with you, that was never the case, right?
Great point, because I really thought that after my first resection, I really thought that I wouldn't deal with Crohn's again. I knew that I would, back then, I really just thought I would be on medications for the rest of my life. Like I thought that's how it would be. And I will never forget, and I'm sure you remember this, it was about a year after my surgery. I was still on all of the medications. And those are more, at that point, they were used to like prevent a flare-up. But I remember we were in Disneyland walking through, we were in like Adventureland, I believe. And is that what's called Adventureland?
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
It's been a while
I know.
since we've
I
been
want to
there.
go back.
We have so much fun.
I want to go back.
And it hit me all of the sudden out of nowhere, the Crohn's pain. I knew instantly what it was. And I remember telling you, I need to go to the bathroom right now. And you like rushing me to the bathroom. And I remember just sobbing, knowing it was back. But that was also one of those times where I literally waited a full month to tell my doctor, because I just didn't want to deal with everything that comes with conventional medicine when it comes to Crohn's disease.
You wanted to be normal.
Yeah.
You just wanted to be normal.
I did.
Yeah.
You were so sweet, though, as always.
I always did my best.
Yeah, you just made me feel so much better. It was a really hard time. So when we go back to taking off of this medication that I've been on for 6.5 years, no more new medications, nothing was really working for me. That's when my GI doctor started really bringing up not having another surgery. And I was like adamantly against it. I did not want to have another surgery. And so that's part of why I just continued to push myself. I was at work as much as I can. I got to the point, it was September 2010, when I became so sick that I remember I should not have been at work, but I remember I'd been out for like the week prior. Went into work that morning. I was so dizzy. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think straight. Everything just felt so foggy. I felt so weak and so shaky. And I was like, something's wrong. Something's really wrong. And so I called my doctor, and it was just my general doctor. And she had told me, Kristen, you can't work anymore. Like, you need to be home. You cannot work anymore. And you need to go to the ER. And at that point, that's when it really shifted. After I developed the fungus in my lungs, everything became so much more serious. Until then, like, it was like, yeah, sinus infection, things like that, but it was nothing ever really life-threatening.
It's almost like you finally got to a point where you were just harboring right around your rock bottom.
Absolutely. Exactly. So, rock bottom. We both hit those. Super fun.
True that.
So I'm immediately out of work, and that was one of my rock bottoms. I felt like my world had collapsed as I knew it. I didn't know what to do. I'm like, how do I just be home? What am I doing with myself? So over that whole fall of 2010, I'm just getting sicker and sicker and sicker, ending up in the hospital with obstructions in my large intestine. And it was over Christmas 2010 when I ended up in the hospital. And every time before I had an obstruction, I mean, the paramedics and fire department had to pick me up multiple times, and these were Mike's coworkers. They were phenomenal. And sometimes they were picking me up in the middle of the night when he had to be at work. And so I was so sick that my body I could not get warm. I was shaking and shivering, so freezing cold, no matter how many layers I had on me. And that is the moment that I knew in December 2010 that I had to have surgery, that my body was failing me and that I would not last much longer like this. And it was the hardest decision I've ever made.
And let's tell people what we're talking about. This is a whole different, bigger surgery. Mm-hmm. So what were they pushing for you to do?
So this was having my entire large intestine removed, because that's what was so inflamed at the time, and that's what was obstructing. And the very, very last part of my small intestine. And that's when I knew. I remember my doctor calling me when I was in the hospital because he was in San Francisco and I was out in the East Bay. And so I remember him calling me and saying, "Are you going to have surgery?" And I said, "Yes, I need this surgery. I know my body's not lasting anymore like this." And so that was having over 6 feet of intestine removed. So when I say that this was a hard decision, it was the hardest decision.
Well, let's not forget. So this is an ileostomy surgery.
Yes.
And this also means that you would be wearing a pouch.
Exactly.
So you're how old at this time?
I was 26, I believe. Pretty young. I mean, mid-20s.
26, young, beautiful woman. And you're going to go from, whatever it is you were to having surgery and having to potentially wear a pouch for the rest of your life. That is what a huge, huge decision
Especially
that was. I
in
really
a
want
society.
people to know, like, when you say it was a difficult decision, it's like, that is life-changing.
Yeah.
Life-changing. And most people couldn't ever comprehend what it would mean to have to adjust your life so much to live with an ileostomy. Everything changes.
Especially in a society that puts so much emphasis on our looks.
It was very hard. It was very hard back then. And seeing you go through it, and I was right there beside you. But I do want to say that life is awesome right now.
It's so awesome.
So
oh my gosh, that's the best.
I really want to put it out there so that people know, like, where you came from and where you are now.
Yeah.
And you've figured out so much of how to deal with your Crohn's. And now we have this awesome opportunity to share your experience in hopes of promoting others to think about things differently and maybe consider different changes that worked for you. Obviously, like we said, we're all different. We're not saying, hey, well, just do what she did and you're going to be good. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying that there is another way.
Yep.
Right? And the story does have a happy ending. There's a lot of big, scary things we're talking about right now. And I'm not doing it. We're not doing it because we want to prove, well, we kind of want to prove a point, but we're not doing it to scare you. We want to show you, like, here's where we were at the bottom of that barrel, at the rock bottom, but here's where we are now. Yeah. And that's our goal. And that's our goal with this episode. And the information we're going to give you is that there's another way. Perhaps there's another way for you.
Absolutely. It's the reason my mindset is as strong as it is today. It's the reason I'm as physically strong as it is today. This drove me when I decided that I was going to have this surgery. I also made the decision that this would become the greatest thing that would ever happen to me.
And it was, right?
It was.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Now it's our time to help others. Yeah. You lived through, this nightmarish hell so that hopefully many others won't have to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think I have a unique perspective of the balance of conventional medicine and natural medicine and finding your own way. I think I have a really beautiful balance with it because I understand when both are needed and they're both so necessary. And there's no right way or wrong way. There's only what's right for you. And I think it's so easy to forget when we're being told to do something or being told that we need to take a certain medication or whatever it is, that we are the only ones that can make that best decision for us. So listening to those inner guides, listening, praying, whatever it is that feels right to you, and trusting yourself. Like, that's what I did. Is I had many people that were not for this surgery. For me, it was my surgery, but I had many people that disagreed with it. But I had to trust myself. I knew what my body needed. And yes, maybe if I had changed my diet, years before surgery, that I wouldn't have needed that surgery. No doubt I wouldn't have needed that surgery, but that wasn't my story. That's not why I'm here.
Correct.
I am here because I can have an ostomy and show people a different way, because quite frankly, the story that's out there about having an ostomy is not a good one.
We're going to change that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been quite the journey.
Love it. Well, we've already established how difficult of a life that you've had with Crohn's. And the truth is, we didn't have to talk that up at all. And the truth is we've left a lot of stuff out that could also go in there.
There's so many details.
But I think we've established you've had a very difficult time.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was up and down.
We've gotten to the point to where you decided you were going to have the surgery, right? So what was the idea of the surgery? Was the idea from your doctors, hey, if you have the surgery, the Crohn's is going to stop?
The idea is to remove the diseased part.
Right, which what they kind of tried doing with the resection, but it never worked.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So tell me, fast forward and you have this surgery, are you healthy now?
I'm not healthy. Bummer. I thought that I would be.
February 4th, 2011. The day I will never forget.
Yeah. That's when I had
the day I'll never forget.
Over 6 feet of intestine removed. And gosh, yeah, I mean, the idea is to cut out the disease section in hopes that you'll be better. But the other thing is that my doctor wanted me to continue to take Crohn's medications. And it kind of blew my mind. I remember when he told me that he was going to put in a new prescription and this and that. And I was like, what? Because part of what led me to the surgery is not only that the medications were no longer working. They used to work really well for me and they just weren't anymore. But also the fact that they were doing so much more harm than good at the time. My immune system was so low. I was catching everything. When I went into surgery, right before I went into surgery, when they tested my immune system, I was labeled high risk. Day before my surgery, they tested my immune system again. And for whatever reason, in that short period of time, it bounced back for a little bit. Again, angels were watching over me. And I was always told, you have the surgery, life will be better, this and that and this. None of that happened. So it took us through quite a journey after hitting rock bottom after rock bottom after rock bottom after being diagnosed with what's called adrenal insufficiency, which was caused by one of the medications that I was on.
That's another video.
That's a whole other video. We'll get to that later. And adrenal problems are just so common. Mine was just a kind of different type of that. But just feeling done with being sick, just wanting to do whatever it took. And so Mike and I really just started to try different lifestyle changes and diet changes. And what led me there, and the place that you don't have to go, is getting to my rock bottom. I had to get so sick. So I had gotten to the point where my doctors didn't know what else to do. And they were kind of starting to tell me and continue to tell me that my life was just going to be how it was and that I needed to accept life as it was and that I would just be sick. And this became this really sad, really limiting story that I was told by every doctor that I saw. And at first I believed them. At first I would leave every doctor's appointment crying and in tears. And then over time, I got tired of my own bullshit, honestly. That's what really drives change. I feel like you get tired of your own bullshit at some point.
True that.
And that's what happened with me. And so I started to tell myself when they would say, you're not going to get better, you need to accept your life, blah, 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 whatever it was, watch me. Not to them. I would say it inside my own head. Watch me. I am going to heal. And I would visualize myself healthy. I spent so much time visualizing how that would be and how that would feel. And it was literally the exact opposite of the life that I was living. But I spent so much time there. And Mike and I were trying different diet changes and different lifestyle changes. And some of them were weird and strange and we didn't like them.
We were willing.
We're willing to do anything.
I say we because I was also willing to do anything, whatever it took for her to be healthy.
Absolutely.
It hurt me so much to see her suffer, not be able to fix it. So that is the one, that was one of the things besides love and support that I could do is be willing to make any changes.
Yeah.
And we made a lot of them.
Yeah.
So many of them until
many.
we finally found what worked for us. Mm-hmm. And I want to underline that. What worked for us.
For us.
For us.
Exactly.
Because it changed my life as well.
Exactly.
Right.
So yeah, it was just experimentation, and we ended up trying paleo. It was quite honestly my last ditch effort. I often get asked of like, why paleo? Why did I do paleo? And we can do a whole nother video about that. But it ended up being what worked really well for both of us. And really, it's an elimination diet.
Well, not just worked really well, it was the one thing
Life-changing.
that worked for you.
Yes. It was the only diet where I really, really, really saw like massive changes in my energy. I started to notice my body healing, my immune system healing. Infections that I'd had for years started to go away. All of that. It was incredible. And it took us hitting a lot of rock bottoms to get there.
I used to carry Kristen up and down the stairs. There were times where she couldn't do anything on her own. You know, we were talking about loving Disneyland, and we do, but one of the reasons why it was kind of a place that we always reverted to when we went on our vacations is because a lot of times she was tired and didn't have energy to do all these things. So we would go hang out in our room, spend a couple hours in Disneyland, go back to the room, take a nap.
Yeah.
You know, we had to learn to live our lives a certain way. So and we were okay with that because I feel like we're two very positive people. I always do my best to be positive and lift you up. But we knew when the diet changes were working because you went from not really having any energy to, well, let's hear you say it.
Yeah.
Because you know more than I do.
I started being able to work out. I remember just like waking up in the morning and feeling good and having energy. Usually it was I would wake up in the morning and not want to get up. Like I would just want to sleep all day long. And that was no longer the case. It shifted everything in my life. And little did I know at the time, I had no idea what like healing my gut meant. No clue. Little did I know at the time that I was starting the very beginning process of healing my gut.
Changed your life.
Which will be another episode and an online course.
Right. No plug intended. But we'll be talking about that more in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it changed your life. Changing the way that we ate not only changed your life, but it changed mine as well.
Absolutely. And also, this was back in 2013 when we made our diet changes. There wasn't that much information out there at that point about paleo. Now, I can pretty much guarantee if you Google Crohn's disease, you're going to come across some diet stuff. But it took me so long to heal my gut and so long to figure things out because I know I don't believe in coincidences and things like that. I know that it just had to be my path. It had to be like that for us. But I didn't know what I was doing, figured it out as we went. But that's why I'm and you and we together are able to help because we've already done all of these things. And we took so much longer than anyone else has to figuring it out because we can lay things out of here's where you can start. Here's where you can make a change in your own life.
I saw you at your lowest point, and now I see you at your highest point.
Ooh.
Doing what you're supposed to do to share this information.
I would say I know the best is yet to come, but we're in a really good place.
We're doing it.
Yeah.
We're doing it. We're sharing it. Well, obviously, we're not going to talk about all of the changes in all of the diet stuff, especially
8-hour-long
on this episode. But our goal is to give you, Kristen's experience. Like, this is where she was. This is what she had to deal with. And this is where she is now. Mm-hmm. And so what is it that you've done to put information together to help other people?
Absolutely.
Specifically, your website.
Yeah, my website, KristenBeamer.com.
I'll write it down here.
You'll link to it below here.
I'll write it here, and then I'll link to it in the description. But this is where you want to go.
So that's my new website where it is so easy to navigate. If you go to About or you go to Healthy Living, you're going to find out everything that I did to heal, everything about my journey. We've got a really cool video over there that you put together. Just a very quick video.
Okay, so let's say I'm a parent. Mm-hmm. My kid has Crohn's. I want to know what you did. I want to learn more. What am I doing on your website?
As far as where to go?
Yeah.
That's where you would go to that like healthy living pages.
Okay.
And then go to how I healed.
How I healed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then also you're sharing all kinds of, keep in mind, this is all free information that you can find on there, right? And your Instagram is also a huge source of information as well, which I'll link down below. But you also tell a little bit about like how the recipes.
Yeah. I have tons of recipes on my website because that's how we really started this whole journey together. And I started to just kind of play around in the kitchen because I knew very quickly once I found what worked that I needed to make this sustainable. And granted, the way that we eat now looks very different than what we ate back then, but that was a very healing diet for me. And the cool thing is that when you're able to heal your gut, you heal, oh my gosh, you heal so much. You heal your entire body, but you also can tolerate many different foods like I could that I wasn't able to before when I was first making diet changes. For example, even the one thing I've never eaten like willingly since I cut it out is gluten. But I remember one time getting accidentally glutened when I was eating at a restaurant, and I was sick for 3 days. I was so sick. I was so bloated. Everything was going right through me. My intestines, you could tell, were just so inflamed. I felt so sick. Then years later, same thing happened. I was accidentally glutened at a restaurant, and it was like a day of not feeling that great, like headachy, congested, like some digestive issues. But it was night and day from before. And that is because I have worked so hard to heal my gut. That's what it can do for you. I mean, one of the many, many things it can do for you.
I got to throw it out there. That's like that sounds like an awesome hashtag. Hashtag accidentally glutened.
No fun. But it's cool because it makes it not really a huge deal, you know, if I get glutened, especially when we're on vacation or something.
And just for the record, for us, that seems to be the one thing that affects us the most, myself included.
For sure.
For whatever reason.
For sure.
Gluten with us. Not good.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
So
yeah, tons of recipes over there. I really put emphasis on different like allergies and tolerances. You can select and, you know, categorize recipes by that.
That's what I was getting at. Like, let's say, you know, you want to do a paleo recipe or whatever, but you need it to be gluten-free and egg-free. You can easily search for these recipes.
Exactly.
Right?
On my website.
Okay. Yep. And that I feel like is such a cool resource for people because it's not always the easiest to find recipes that, you know, take all these things into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another thing too is what's awesome about Kristen's recipes is they're not only delicious, is they're not overly complicated to make. Or like difficult.
Easy,
The idea behind the construction of these things was delicious, simple, easy, minimal ingredients.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
And obviously, most importantly, healthy for the body.
Yeah, make us feel good.
Yeah, for sure. Well, is there anything else that you want to touch on there?
The only thing that I didn't get to that I had written down that I realized was what you can do for someone who was just diagnosed or has Crohn's, that someone that you love in your life. And from my perspective, we can either talk about your perspective now or a whole nother episode where I would say just being there. It's really amazing. You really learn who your true friends and family are when you get sick. That's one of the times in your life that you can. Because we absolutely did, because it's really amazing how many people will just completely disappear because most of the time, it's not meant like they're a total jerk or whatever. They are just leaving because they don't know what to do. All you have to do is be there. Just show up, bring some soup, whatever it is. You don't even have to bring anything. Listen.
Love.
That's the best
support,
thing you can do. Listen.
Be empathetic.
Yeah. Just ask them, what can I do to help?
Yeah.
I think a big thing that I would say, please don't do that, is to try to force any kind of lifestyle or diet changes or force information on them. Really ever, but especially when someone's first being diagnosed because they're already going through so much. It's a whole new world they're navigating. They don't need more information. So you just have to trust that they're going to find that when they're ready. And, you know, like we talked about in our last episode, lead by example.
Absolutely. Yeah. These people are at a low emotional point, and when you're there, it's difficult to take on new things. You know, you're just trying to keep your head above water per se. So
I always think one of the best things you could do is offer to listen and ask them if there's anything that you could do to help. But really, that's all you need to do. Like, that's the extent.
if you're there,
Yeah.
you know, and you're there listening because you care, I feel like you're ahead of the game there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Support is everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure is.
I learned a lot from, you know, being a partner to someone with severe Crohn's, and the best thing I could do, please tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm right, is just love
you're right.
and be there and be willing to make changes in my own life if need be.
Yep.
I'm sure not everyone is going to be there or want to change their life for someone else, but for me, it was just never an option. It's like, of course I'm going to do that. Of course I am.
Yeah. That's just who you are.
That's just who I am. So anyways, I feel like we're almost about an hour and a half-ish in. I feel like this is a great episode, and we'll definitely be talking more about this in the future, but I feel like this gives us all a good perspective as to where you were, where you're at now, and we're going to give you some potential solutions by starting off by going to this website and reading the information there.
Yep.
And just knowing that there could be another way. And doctors are awesome, and they always do their best, but they may not always have the answer for you. Mm-hmm. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But
I'd say the number one thing that led to my healing was keeping an open mind. If I had closed off all these solutions, I wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be here, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that, sweetie.
This is a great one. Thank you for listening and watching.
This is a great one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, till next week. And
if there's any other questions that you would like us to talk about in the future, please drop them below in the comments.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, everybody.
Have a great week.
Much love. Peace.